Luke begins his gospel writing to his friend, Theophilus. But a closer inspection reveals Luke's contextual emphasis. For Theo means God, and Philos means child God. So Luke is placing his writing in divine context, writing to the children of God, in the presence of God. Luke continues by saying mysteriously, extraordinary events are occurring all around us, and I have interviewed those who were eyewitnesses to these events so that I could send an orderly account to you. Oh, Luke has us right where he wants us. Us, children of God, about to receive an up-to-date account of disorder. In this context, he tells the miracle story of how in all of the hubbub, Jesus' birth took place barely noticed. And now, here in chapter 3, Luke sets deeper backdrop, deeper context for the beginning of Jesus' ministry, the beginning of Jesus' adult ministry, by introducing us to a gang of unhappy tyrants. What a cast of characters. Roman Emperor Tiberius had inherited the throne from his father, Caesar Augustus, but not before struggling with his brother Drusus to obtain it. In the meantime, Tiberius divorced the love of his life to marry a woman more befitting his station. He is said to have seen his first wife in the street and followed her screaming and crying and begging for her forgiveness. So right away we have a picture of an unhappy, unstable emperor. Then Tiberius continued to support the governorship of one Pontius Pilate, an unhappy Gentile who was very unhappy that he was sent to be the governor over Judea and Israel. And Pontius Pilate, who could have saved the life of Jesus Christ, but in the scripture it tells us he literally washed his hands and chose, when a life was involved, not to get involved. Then there was Tiberius' brother Philip, ruling over Iturea and Trachonitis, I think is how you pronounce it. That's pretty good. Trachonitis, who would marry Salome. And it was common knowledge during that time that Salome had asked to be rewarded for a dance she performed, and she asked to receive the severed head of John the Baptist. Luke brings up Licinius, ruler of Abilene, who had close ties with cruel Caligula. And finally, there's Annas and Caiaphas, two temple high priests, father-in-law and son-in-law, playthings of the Romans who would remove one in favor of the other, both of whom chose to play large parts in the arrest and sentencing of Jesus. I don't know how friendly these characters all were with each other, but coming from different countries and cultures, these biblical powerhouses were like 20th century Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, and Franco, all of them with their different agendas, and all the other World War II era leaders all around the world who saw evil intent, but did nothing to stop it. All of them were together a formidable team of tyranny and oppression. So the Greek physician Dr. Luke wrote, and he unfolds this tale clearly wanting us, Theophilus, all of us children of God, wanting us to discover God's joy coming of age in a backdrop of mentally ill, emotionally ill, codependent, brutally oppressive disorder. That's our context. Luke is arguing that opposed to all of this law and order and power being wielded by unstable people, the good news of the rescue and saving power of God had to slip into the world out in a barn behind an inn and then be proclaimed by Zechariah's wild, camel hair wearing, locust eating son, John the Baptist, John the Baptizer, and proclaimed where? In the wilderness. The history of the chosen people contained many examples of God bypassing authority and revealing God's message in the wilderness. Moses had to leave the authority of the Egyptian palace and live in the desert for 40 years before God appeared to him in the form of a burning bush. Elijah had to flee from the great pagan temple of Jezebel and Ahab and all of their prophets and hide, nearly frightened to death, in a cave in the wilderness until he was rescued by the still, small voice of the Lord. So, what do we see in this depiction over and over again of God's good news coming over and over to us again, not to palaces, but to pits? Not to governments, but to grovelers. Not to the mighty, but to the marginalized. What do we see? I sat a few Wednesdays ago, December the 5th, and along with you, watched the nation stop to honor George Herbert Walker Bush. I loved all the music, as I shared before. I was especially moved when, as they moved the president's body, the band played a simple hymn of affirmation and prayer, a hymn that was so dear to my grandmother. My faith looks up to thee. I listened as his son and other statesmen described him as virtuous and ethical, and I watched as at both services his grandchildren, largely granddaughters, read prophetic words of Scripture describing God as the resurrection and the life. Words saying there will one day be no more war. Words saying that your sons and daughters will be able to safely rest. And when the camera angle changed, I saw 5 living presidents. 5 living leaders of the free world. I looked at the first female presidential candidate to win by a huge popular vote. I looked at them all surrounded by a sanctuary full of generals and cabinet secretaries and attachés and other diplomats and a crown prince. And I wondered, are you taking in these prophetic predictions to heart? Do you want to be part of where God is going? Or are you just listening politely in your dark clothes, your dark suits and tasteful dark dresses? Or are you choosing not to listen at all? Would once again Scripture and détente encountering each other, truth speaking to power over this man's body, make any difference this time? Or would it be like most other times, pomp and circumstance and tears today, and then back to party lines and power tomorrow? We see that this Lucan Scripture makes clear that the dwelling places and schedules of those most powerful at any given time may not be, are not the places where we see the obvious joy of God. This week, lawyers going to prison, British Prime Minister sacrificed to Brexit, ballots still being counted in races too close to call. Since we know that the best that the halls of power have been able to produce is an uneasy truce, a temporary prosperity, we are to take this proclamation of joy coming out of the wilderness very seriously. Joy being found in the wilderness. John the Baptist is quoting the First Testament prophet Isaiah. When Isaiah said, "Prepare ye the way of the Lord, make his path straight, every mountain shall be made low, and every valley exalted," he is proclaiming gladness and joy to the chosen people who were returning back to the promised land after seeking the will of God for 70 years in the wilderness that was Babylon. Isaiah is saying, "Beloved, you were driven to that scary wilderness, and there you found a new relationship with God. Even in your travail, you found that God had never left you." Israel, Isaiah says, capture that joy that you discovered in the wilderness and bring that joy back home. Centuries later, John the Baptist co-opts Isaiah's words to say, "You have been wandering in the wilderness of your disobedience to God, and neither Rome nor the temple has been able to save you. The law has sent you to hell." In the birth of a little child in Bethlehem, grown up among you in Nazareth, and now about to be baptized and proclaimed as God with us, Emmanuel, in the middle of the additional wasteland and desert of tyranny and oppression, you, in your wilderness, have been given the gift of God's way out. God's salvation, God's joy. Capture that joy in your wilderness. Bring that joy back home. The wilderness. The unknown. A young Barak is reputed to have told a younger Michelle, as he was working up the nerve to ask her to marry him, "Oh, come on, Michelle. The unknown won't kill you." You and I are called to constantly examine the wilderness of our minds, the wilderness of our lives, the wilderness of this age, and greatly discover the joy and freedom that is ours as a result of God coming to earth, slipping past authority, I might add, cleverly disguised as a helpless little baby. I've heard that a bunch of people getting together from this area drive to San Diego quite often to protest the mistreatment of immigrants at the border. These people banding together for a worthy cause have found something else. In the wilderness of their discomfort and frustration at the treatment of some of God's people, they have found joy and common purpose and relationship with each other. So now they're carpooling to the border. Last night, one of the dear members and active participants in Little White Chapel, Simon, came to worship. Simon is a trans young man who is wanted to come to worship and get fortified by his friends in California before he goes to the wilderness that is Tennessee to Christmas. But he tells this story. He says when he came to California knowing that he was trans, he didn't have any family. And so he joined a chorus of trans singers. They were 10 to 12 people. In a year, their number has swelled to 48. In the wilderness, they have found the joy of knowing each other. Today, our sanctuary is very quiet. There are no babies lying on the floor doing figure eight, making snow angels in the middle of worship. What is that, God? You're saying that babies lying on the floor is joy in the wilderness. And you're saying that each one of us should make ourselves individuals and companies of one to go and make those parents welcome and thank God for the fact that they had the realization to bring their children to church, to a place where they would be welcome. And we should talk to them about how we can establish a Sunday school. You and I are called to, no matter what we experience, no matter how wild our wildness is, to as quickly as we can find the joy. Let's pray. God, your joy is not a frivolous thing. It comes wrapped sometimes in really strange packages. Most of us in this room have stories of having to go a long way to eventually find you. Give us courage, give us strength, give us forbearance, give us patience with each other. But give us the resolve to never stop looking for you in every situation. And in that place, thereby, find your Son, who is our heart's joy. It's in his name we pray.